The smoke was everywhere. Brittany pressed herself against the floor of the storage room, her lungs burning with every shallow breath she managed to take. The air had turned thick and poisonous, and somewhere above her, maybe 2 floors, maybe 3, the old textile warehouse groaned like a dying animal. She had only come here to photograph the vintage industrial windows for her architectural blog. The building had been abandoned for years, scheduled for demolition next month. She'd slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, thinking she'd be in and out in 20 minutes. That was before the explosion. She didn't know what had caused it, a gas leak, faulty wiring, something left behind by squatters. But one moment she'd been framing a shot of rusted machinery against filtered afternoon light, and the next moment the world had erupted into chaos. The force had thrown her backward, and when she'd scrambled to her feet, disoriented and terrified, she'd discovered that the stairwell she'd used to climb to the 4th floor was now a wall of flames. She'd found this storage room. She'd closed the heavy metal door behind her, and now she was going to die here, alone, surrounded by moldering boxes of fabric samples that had probably been sitting here since the 70s. The floor shuddered beneath her, and somewhere in the building, something collapsed with a sound like thunder. Brittany pressed her face harder against the concrete, her fingers digging into the grime, tears streaming down her cheeks and mixing with the soot that had already blackened her skin. She thought about her mother, who would have to identify her body. She thought about her younger sister's wedding next spring, the bridesmaid dress she'd never wear. She thought about all the things she'd meant to do, all the things she'd kept putting off, all the conversations she'd been too afraid to have. 26 years old, and this was how it ended. The door burst open. Brittany screamed, scrambling backwards, certain that the flames had finally found her. But it wasn't fire that came through the doorway. It was a man, a firefighter, his face obscured by his breathing apparatus, his turnout gear streaked with ash and debris. He swept a flashlight across the room, and when the beam found her, he was already moving. "Can you walk?" His voice was muffled by the mask, but she heard the authority in it, the absolute certainty. He knelt beside her, one gloved hand finding her shoulder, and even through the terror and the smoke and the chaos, Brittany felt something steady in his touch. I don't know. My ankle." She'd twisted it when the explosion threw her. She hadn't even noticed the pain until now, but when she tried to move, it flared white hot. "That's okay. I've got you." He scooped her up like she weighed nothing, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. Brittany's fingers found the straps of his gear and held on, her face pressed against his chest, her body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. "Stay low. Keep your face against me. Don't breathe deep." He was already moving, carrying her through the doorway into a hallway that had become a vision of hell. The flames were closer now, licking at the walls, the heat so intense that Brittany could feel it through his body. She squeezed her eyes shut and pressed closer, and she felt his arms tighten around her. "The stairs! They're gone!" "I know. We're not going that way." He turned left instead of right, moving with a confidence that seemed impossible in the chaos. The building groaned again, and Brittany felt the floor shift beneath them, not collapsing, not yet, but threatening, warning. 30 seconds. That's all I need. Just 30 seconds. She didn't know if he was talking to her or to himself, but she held on tighter and tried to believe him. They burst through another door, and suddenly there was air. Not clean, not safe, but cooler, less toxic. Brittany opened her eyes and saw a fire escape, the metal ladder descending into darkness below. Another firefighter waited at the top, reaching for her. "Take her! Get her down! I'm right behind you!" And then she was being transferred, other hands supporting her, other arms holding her steady. She looked back just in time to see her rescuer silhouetted against the glow of the flames. And then the building gave a final, terrible shudder. "No!" But he was already moving, already launching himself through the window onto the fire escape. The structure swayed and groaned under the combined weight, and then they were descending, 2 firefighters and 1 terrified woman, racing the collapse that was coming. They hit the ground just as the 4th floor gave way. Brittany felt the impact through the earth, heard the roar of the building finally surrendering to the flames. And then she was being carried again, away from the heat, away from the smoke, toward the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles that had gathered on the street. Someone was wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else was fitting an oxygen mask over her face. Brittany breathed in the clean, cool air and sobbed, her entire body trembling with the force of what had almost happened. And through the chaos, through the shouting and the sirens and the spray of water against flames, she looked up and found him. He'd removed his breathing apparatus now, and she could see his face for the first time. Strong jaw, dark eyes, a smear of soot across his cheek. He was talking to another firefighter, gesturing toward the building, but as if he felt her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met, and Brittany felt something shift in her chest, something that had nothing to do with smoke inhalation or terror or the adrenaline still flooding her veins. "Thank you," she whispered it, knowing he couldn't hear her from this distance, but his expression softened. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and then he was being called away, back to the work of fighting the fire. Brittany watched him go, and she thought, I need to know his name. The hospital released her 6 hours later with a sprained ankle, minor smoke inhalation, and a prescription for rest. Her mother cried on the phone. Her sister threatened to drive 6 hours just to confirm she was alive. Her friends texted in a constant stream of disbelief and relief and demands for details. But Brittany couldn't stop thinking about him. She learned his name from the news coverage that night. Andrew Mercer, 12-year veteran of the fire department, credited with the rescue of a 26-year-old woman from the warehouse blaze that had ultimately destroyed the entire structure. There was a brief interview clip, Andrew deflecting praise with quiet professionalism, insisting he'd just been doing his job. But she'd seen his face when he'd burst through that door. She'd felt his arms steady around her as he'd carried her through hell. That wasn't just a job. That was something else entirely. 3 days later, Brittany walked into the fire station with a basket of baked goods she'd made herself and a card signed by her entire family. The firefighter at the front desk, a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, smiled when she explained why she was there. "Andrew's out back. I'll get him for you." The waiting was agony. Brittany stood in the bay, surrounded by gleaming red trucks and coiled hoses, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her sprained ankle. This was ridiculous. She was being ridiculous. He'd saved dozens of people over his career. She was just another name on a list. But when he walked through the door, when his eyes found hers, and something flickered in their depths, she knew she hadn't imagined it. "You're the one." From the warehouse. Brittany Shaw." She held out the basket, feeling suddenly foolish. He was in a department t-shirt and uniform pants, his hair still damp from what she guessed was a recent shower, and up close, without the gear and the chaos, he was even more striking than she'd remembered. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did. You saved my life." He took the basket, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Brittany could feel the other firefighters watching from doorways, could sense the curiosity radiating from every corner of the station. "How's the ankle?" "Better. The doctor says I'll be back to normal in a couple of weeks." He nodded, and she watched something war in his expression. Professionalism against something else, something she couldn't quite name. "I'm glad you're okay. Really glad." There was a weight to the words that made her breath catch. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Where he'd grown up, how he'd become a firefighter, what his favorite food was, whether he'd felt it too, that moment when their eyes met across the chaos. Instead, she smiled and stepped back. "Maybe I could buy you coffee sometime, as a thank you." She watched him hesitate, and her heart sank. Of course. Of course there were rules about this, protocols, reasons why a firefighter couldn't just go on a date with someone he'd rescued. She'd been foolish to even ask. "I shouldn't." "No, I get it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you in an awkward position." She turned toward the door, her face burning with embarrassment, and she was 3 steps away when his voice stopped her. "There's a coffee shop on Riverside. Grounds and Grind. I'm off duty Thursday afternoon." Brittany turned back, her heart suspended somewhere between her ribs and her throat. "Thursday?" 3 o'clock, if you want." She did want. She wanted it more than she could explain. "I'll be there." She arrived at 2:45 on Thursday, her palms sweating, her mind racing through a dozen possible outcomes. He wouldn't show up. He'd show up and they'd have nothing to talk about. He'd show up and she'd realize that what she'd felt was just adrenaline, just gratitude, just the trauma bonding her therapist had warned her about during their emergency session last night. But when Andrew walked through the door at exactly 3 o'clock, when his eyes found hers and his face relaxed into a smile that made her stomach flip, Brittany knew this wasn't gratitude. This was something else entirely. "You came." "You sound surprised. I'm the one who asked, remember?" He slid into the booth across from her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. He was in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater that made his eyes look even darker. And Brittany had to remind herself to breathe. "I almost didn't come. I've been going back and forth about it all week." "Why?" He ran a hand through his hair, and she saw the conflict in his expression. "Because you went through something traumatic. Because I was part of that trauma. And I don't want to be the guy who takes advantage of someone who's vulnerable." The words landed like a gift, not because they were what she wanted to hear, but because they told her exactly who he was. Someone who thought about these things, who worried about doing the right thing, who cared about more than just his own desires. "I've been thinking about that too. Whether what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude, trauma response, whatever you want to call it." "And what did you decide?" Brittany wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. "I decided that the only way to know is to find out, to actually spend time together as normal people and see what's there. If it's just a rescue fantasy, it'll fade, but if it's something more..." She trailed off, and Andrew nodded slowly. "Then we owe it to ourselves to find out." Exactly. They talked for 2 hours. He told her about growing up in a small town 3 hours north, about his father who'd been a firefighter before him, about the moment he'd known this was what he was meant to do. She told him about her architecture blog, about her dreams of turning it into something more, about the way the warehouse fire had made her realize how much of her life she'd been putting on hold. When the coffee shop started to empty out, when the barista began pointedly wiping down tables around them, Andrew looked at his watch and laughed. I had no idea it was this late. Me neither. He walked her to her car, and they stood in the parking lot as the sun began to set, neither of them quite ready for the afternoon to end. I'd like to do this again, if you would. I would. I really would. He didn't kiss her. He didn't even take her hand. But the look he gave her as he said goodbye carried more promise than any physical gesture could have. And Brittany drove home with her heart full of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Their second date was dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. Their third was a walk along the river, where Andrew told her about the hardest rescue of his career, a 5-year-old trapped in a car accident, and she watched his eyes go distant with the weight of memories he rarely shared. How do you carry that? All those moments, all those people. He was quiet for a long time, watching the water move. Some days I don't know if I do. Some days I come home and I can't stop seeing their faces, can't stop wondering if I did enough, if I could have been faster, smarter, better. But you saved so many people. You saved me. Yeah, and that's what I try to hold on to. The ones I could save. The ones who got to go home. They'd stopped walking, and Brittany reached out, her fingers finding his. It was the first time they'd touched since the rescue, and she felt the contact move through her like electricity. I think about that night a lot. The warehouse. What about it? The way you looked at me, after, through all the chaos, all the noise, you looked at me like... He trailed off, shaking his head. Like what? Like you saw me. Not the uniform, not the job, just me. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. I did see you. I still do. He kissed her for the first time by the river, with the sunset painting the water gold and pink. It was gentle, tentative, like a question he was asking rather than an answer he was giving. And when they pulled apart, when she saw the wonder in his eyes, Brittany knew this wasn't gratitude. This was the beginning of something real. But beginnings are never simple. The first time Brittany met Andrew's colleagues at the fire station, she felt the weight of their scrutiny. They were polite, welcoming even, but she caught the glances they exchanged, the raised eyebrows, the murmured conversations that stopped when she walked into the room. She understood. She did. This was unusual, potentially problematic. A firefighter dating someone he'd rescued? It raised questions, invited speculation, complicated things for everyone. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. They'll come around. They just need time. They were in Andrew's truck, driving back from a Sunday dinner at the station, and Brittany was trying not to cry. That woman, the one with the short hair, she asked me if I'd considered that I might just be fixated on you because of the trauma. Right to my face, Andrew, like I haven't spent every day for the past month asking myself the same question. That was out of line. I'll talk to her. Don't. It'll just make things worse. They already think I'm some kind of, I don't know, rescue groupie. He pulled the truck over, right there on the side of the road, and turned to face her. Hey, look at me. She looked, and she saw everything in his eyes, the frustration, the determination, and underneath it all, something that made her heart stop. I don't care what they think. I care what's true. And what's true is that I haven't felt this way about anyone in years, maybe ever. What's true is that when I'm with you, everything else gets quiet. What's true is that I didn't pursue you because I saved your life. I pursued you because when our eyes met across that parking lot, something happened. Something I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. Brittany's breath caught. Andrew, I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why it shouldn't work. But I also know what I feel. And I'm not willing to walk away from that just because other people don't understand. He reached across the console and took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Are you? She shook her head. No, I'm not. Her friends were no easier than his colleagues. Brittany sat across from her two closest friends at their usual brunch spot, watching them exchange the same kind of meaningful looks she'd seen at the fire station. I just think you should be careful, her friend Meredith said, stirring her mimosa with studied casualness. Trauma bonding is a real thing, and this is all moving really fast. She's right, added her friend Tessa. You almost died, Britt. Your brain is looking for something to hold on to, someone who makes you feel safe. That's not the same as love. Brittany set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. I knew you were going to say that. I knew it! Which is why I almost didn't tell you. But I thought maybe, just maybe, you might actually trust me to know my own feelings. We do trust you. We're just worried. You're worried I'm too damaged to make good decisions. That's what you're really saying. The silence that followed was answer enough. Brittany looked at her friends, women she'd known for years, women who'd been there through breakups and career changes and every mundane crisis of her adult life. And she felt the distance open between them like a crack in the earth. I know what trauma bonding looks like. I've done the research. I've talked to a therapist, and yes, I've questioned everything I feel over and over because I don't want to build my life on a foundation of illusion. She took a breath. But Andrew isn't just a symbol of safety to me. He's a person, a complicated, thoughtful, wonderful person who makes me laugh and challenges me and listens when I talk and shares things with me that he doesn't share with anyone else. And the way I feel about him isn't about the rescue. It's about who he is and who I am when I'm with him and the future I can actually see us building together. Meredith and Tessa exchanged another glance, but this time it was different. Softer. Okay, Britt. We hear you. Just promise you'll keep talking to your therapist and that you'll tell us if something doesn't feel right? I promise. The tension didn't disappear entirely, but it eased. And Brittany realized that proving the truth of her feelings wasn't going to happen in a single conversation. It was going to happen over time, through actions, through the steady accumulation of moments that showed what she and Andrew had was real. 6 weeks after the fire, Brittany's apartment flooded. It was a pipe burst in the unit above hers, catastrophic and sudden, and by the time she got home from work, everything she owned was soaked, and the building manager was telling her it would be at least 2 weeks before she could move back in. She stood in the hallway, staring at the ruined remains of her life, and she felt something inside her crack. The fire had almost killed her, and now this, not life-threatening, but devastating in its own way. All her photographs, her books, her grandmother's quilt, gone. When Andrew answered her call, she couldn't speak. She could only cry. Where are you? I'm coming. 20 minutes later, he was there, and he didn't say a word about the chaos or the damage or the water still dripping from the ceiling. He just pulled her into his arms and held her while she fell apart. It's okay. Let it out. I've got you.
I'm so tired of losing things. I'm so tired of being afraid.
I know you are. He helped her salvage what could be saved. He loaded boxes into his truck, and when she finally asked, with shame burning in her cheeks, if she could stay with him for a few days while she figured things out, he looked at her like she was crazy for even questioning it. I was going to suggest it myself. Stay as long as you need. She meant to stay for a week, maybe 2, but something happened in Andrew's small house, with its mismatched furniture and photos of his parents on the mantel and the smell of coffee that always seemed to linger in the air. Something shifted between them, deepened, became something neither of them had expected. I like it here. They were sitting on his back porch, watching the sunset, and the words slipped out before she could stop them. Yeah? It feels like home. More than my apartment ever did, actually. Andrew was quiet for a moment, and when she looked at him, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. I've been thinking about that, about how easy this has been, having you here, how right it feels. Her heart quickened. And I know it's probably too soon. I know we should be sensible. But I don't want you to leave, Brittany. Not when the apartment's fixed. Not ever. She stared at him. Are you asking me to move in with you? I'm asking if you'd consider it. Down the road. When you're ready. If you're ever ready. I don't want to pressure you, She kissed him. Hard enough to stop his rambling. Soft enough to tell him everything she couldn't put into words. I've been so scared of moving too fast, of what people would think, of proving everyone right about trauma bonding and rescue fantasies and all the reasons this shouldn't work. I know. But when I try to imagine going back to my apartment, to my old life, to the way things were before you, I can't. I don't want to. What I want is this. Us. Whatever that looks like. Whatever that looks like. Whatever that looks like. Moving in together wasn't without its challenges. They had to navigate their different schedules, his 24-hour shifts, her late nights working on her blog. They had to learn each other's rhythms, each other's quirks, each other's ways of dealing with stress. And there were still moments when the doubts crept in. One night, 3 months into living together, Brittany woke from a nightmare about the fire. She was gasping, covered in sweat, and for a moment she didn't know where she was, only that she needed to escape, needed to find air, needed to survive. Andrew was awake instantly, pulling her close, murmuring reassurances against her hair. You're safe. You're here. It's okay. I could still smell it, the smoke. I could feel the heat. I know. But you got out. You're alive. You're here with me. Slowly, her breathing calmed. Slowly, the terror receded, and in its place came a different kind of fear. Quieter, but just as potent. Sometimes I wonder if this is why I'm with you. If I'm just looking for someone to make me feel safe. If that's all this is. Andrew was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured. Do you feel safe with me? Yes. And is that a bad thing? She didn't have an answer for that. He shifted, turning so they were facing each other in the darkness. I spent 12 years running into burning buildings, Brittany. I've seen what fear does to people, and I've seen what safety means, how powerful it is, how necessary. Wanting to feel safe isn't weakness. It isn't some psychological trick your brain is playing on you. But how do I know that's not all it is? Let me ask you something. When we're sitting on the porch arguing about what to watch on TV, do you feel safe then? Despite everything, she laughed. Yes. What about when I'm telling you stories about my terrible cooking attempts in college? Especially then. What about when we're not doing anything at all? When we're just existing in the same space? Does your brain tell you then that you're clinging to safety? She thought about it, really thought about it. No, it doesn't. Because what we have isn't about rescue, Brittany. It started there, yeah, but it's grown into something else. Something that exists because we chose each other, not because circumstances forced us together. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, not because I saved you, because of who you are. Because you make my life better just by being in it. And I'll tell you that as many times as you need to hear it, for as long as you need to hear it. I love you too. She meant it. She knew it in that moment, with a certainty that went beyond doubt. This was real. This was chosen. This was love. A year after the fire, Brittany wrote about their story for her blog. Not the rescue, that had been covered by enough news outlets, but the aftermath, the journey, the complicated, messy, beautiful process of building a relationship from extraordinary circumstances. She wrote about the doubt and the judgment. She wrote about proving everyone wrong, including herself. She wrote about what it meant to find love in the ashes of the worst moment of your life. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments, hundreds of emails, women from all over the country sharing their own stories of unexpected love and the courage it took to believe in it. Andrew read it the night it went live, sitting on the couch while she paced nervously in the kitchen. Is it okay? I tried to be honest without invading your privacy too much, but if it's too much, it's perfect. He set down his phone and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. I didn't know you felt that way. Some of those things, I didn't know. I'm better at writing than talking sometimes. Maybe, but this. He shook his head and she saw his eyes glisten. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said about me. It's all true. I know. That's what makes it beautiful. He proposed on the anniversary of the fire. She knew it was coming. They'd talked about the future enough that marriage was an implicit part of it. But the when and how remained a mystery until the moment Andrew drove them to the site where the warehouse had once stood. The building was gone now, replaced by a community garden that had sprung up in its place. Where there had been fire and fear and smoke, there were now sunflowers and tomatoes and benches where people came to enjoy the summer evenings. Why are we here? Andrew took her hand and led her to a spot near the center of the garden. Do you know what was here? Before the warehouse, I mean? Brittany shook her head. I looked it up. 100 years ago, this was a field. Before the city grew, before the factories came, this was just open land where people would come to watch the stars. He turned to face her, and she saw the trembling in his hands. I almost lost you here. Before I ever really got to know you. And every time I drive past this place, I think about how close we came to never happening. How many things had to go right for me to find you in that storage room? For us to end up here? Andrew. But we did end up here. Against all odds, despite all the doubt, we made something real, something lasting, something I want to keep making for the rest of my life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, Simple, elegant, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. I saved your life, Brittany, but you saved mine too. You gave me something to come home to, something to fight for, something beyond the job. You showed me what it could be like to actually share my life with someone. He dropped to one knee, right there in the garden that had grown from the ashes. Marry me. Not because I rescued you, but because we chose each other. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life proving that what we have is real. Brittany was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded, once, twice, over and over, and when Andrew slid the ring onto her finger, when he stood and gathered her in his arms, she knew that this was the beginning of everything. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah? Was there ever any doubt? I was about 90% sure. That other 10% was terrifying. She kissed him, there in the garden, with the sun setting gold and pink behind them. They married the following spring, in a small ceremony at the community garden. Andrew's colleagues stood beside him as groomsmen, including the woman who had once asked Brittany about trauma bonding, who had since become one of her closest friends. Meredith and Tessa stood beside Brittany, their initial skepticism long since transformed into genuine support and love. When Andrew saw her walking toward him in her simple white dress, his face crumpled with emotion. "You're beautiful." "You're not so bad yourself, Firefighter." The officiant spoke about love and commitment and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together, but Brittany barely heard the words. She was lost in Andrew's eyes, in the steady grip of his hands on hers, in the knowledge that this was exactly where she was meant to be. "You may kiss the bride." And he did, gently, thoroughly, like he was sealing a promise he intended to keep for the rest of his life. 2 years later, Brittany stood in the doorway of their nursery, watching Andrew rock their newborn daughter to sleep. She'd woken from another nightmare, not about the fire this time, but about the early labor that had rushed them to the hospital 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The fear was different now, less about smoke and flames, and more about the 1,000 things that could go wrong as a parent. But when she watched Andrew with their daughter, the gentleness of his hands, the softness of his voice, the absolute devotion in his eyes, the fear faded. It didn't disappear entirely. She suspected it never would, but it became something manageable, something she could carry. "Hey, you. Can't sleep?" "I'm okay. Just wanted to see you two." He shifted, making room, and she crossed to join them. Their daughter, Elena, named for Andrew's grandmother, slept peacefully in her father's arms, utterly content. "She has your nose. She has your stubbornness." "That's fair." They sat together in the quiet nursery, their daughter between them, and Brittany thought about how far they'd come. From a burning building to this moment, from strangers to partners to parents. "I'm glad you found me." Andrew looked at her, his eyes full of everything they'd built together. "I'm glad you let me. For a while, I wasn't sure I should. Wasn't sure it was real. Wasn't sure it would last." "I know, me neither. But it did. It did. And it will." He leaned over their sleeping daughter and kissed her, soft and certain. "Forever, Brittany. That's what I promised you, and I meant it." Forever. Outside, the sun was rising on another ordinary day. Another day of chaos and joy and the beautiful mundane reality of building a life together. Another day of proving that what they had was real. Elena stirred, making a small sound, and Brittany reached out to stroke her daughter's cheek. "We should tell her the story someday. How we met." "Which version? The dramatic rescue or the part where I almost chickened out of the coffee shop?"
All of it. Every messy, complicated, wonderful part.
Even the part where your friends thought you were trauma bonding?
Especially that part. Because she needs to know that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to. That sometimes it finds you in the worst moment of your life, and that doesn't make it any less real.
Andrew's arm tightened around her. "I love you. Both of you. More than I have words for."
"I know. I love you too."
Elena opened her eyes, her father's dark eyes, and looked up at them with the perfect trust of a child who has never known fear. And Brittany thought, this is what we built from the ashes. This is what we saved. The building had been collapsing. He had refused to leave without her, and in the years that followed, through doubt and judgment and all the complicated work of building something real, neither of them had ever stopped choosing each other. That was the story. Not the rescue, though the rescue was part of it, but the love that grew after, tested, proven, and stronger for all the fires it had survived. Forever. Did you like the story? Do you want a part 2? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, comment which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out in the next videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching!